When we first introduced Bob to Chip, we kind of felt like he'd be a great board member. And Chip really embraced Bob. And so we felt like if these two have a connection, that's more important than trying to find the perfect person to fit into this role.
And Chip and I sat down with Bob and had a conversation about, why come here, why participate in the company rather than be an advisor. And Bob was very, very, very eager to participate, I think for a few reasons. I think he'd never really hit the big times financially. And this was a big equity opportunity for him if he participated in a significant way. I think secondly, he really was amazed at what had been created with Lululemon, and I think Bob really saw it as one that he could contribute to.
And I liked Bob because Reebok had been one of the few companies that had gone into the women's athletic business and had really messed up. And I like people that have messed up. I think there's a lot of learning there. And Bob, I could tell, wanted another shot at making sure he didn't make the same mistake on the women's market. So even though Bob was proposed to me as a board of directors person, I started to see him as a CEO. And I proposed, to Bob that he become the CEO. And I made a lot of mistakes in that one area. And one is because he became almost de facto CEO before we had arranged for a contract. So our negotiating stance was quite poor.
Bob had a lot of the background, and we felt like he was sensitive to the culture, but the situation wasn't perfect.
I think Bob was very much of a big company person. This is a company, Lululemon, that started in a shabby old office that was attached to the outlet store and to the factory. Bob came from a very large company and didn't share some of the basic values that Lulu people shared, the dedication to Vancouver and the community that a lot of people shared.
But Bob did some really important things, and he came to the company when it was without much infrastructure, and he provided a lot of really key guidance at a time when the company, when we first met the company, they were in 10,000 square feet of rented office space and growing like a weed. And so the idea of trying to take the company to the next level was pretty daunting.
I think the thing that Bob really brought to the company was the recognition that the current supply chain infrastructure could not support the growth and vision of the brand. And so, bringing in the production team, bringing in the buying team, setting up the allocation functions, some of the more traditional pieces that we still had to have in order to scale the company. But then how far do you go becoming like everybody else? Always becomes that kind of judgment.
In a lot of ways, he was absolutely wonderful. We needed a lot of really strong direction at the time, and Bob was, not only his presence was that, but his experience gave us a shift to really move into the future. But Bob, was also a salesman, and he knew what we wanted to hear, and he gave it to us. And the business acumen didn't match up with the cultural fit.
I remember him telling me, you have the A people and you have the B people and you have the C people. And he'd walked around and categorized people based on his first view of how they could or couldn't perform into those categories. And he was clear he didn't have really internally any A people. So he had to go outside and hire the A people. And it's just a different model, and it's not the model Lululemon was built on.
He hired maybe 6 or 7 people under him, and of course, they weren't enrolled in the way that our culture of responsibility and integrity and the way we talked in integrity. And but we kind of felt young. We felt inexperienced, and like these people had been in business for a long time, like they should know what they're doing. But I'd say within about a year, we quickly learned that we knew more than they did. And it was really what we had created. The reason we were successful is because we had left all the stuff that they had learned behind and recreated a new type of company.
when you have 3, 4, 5 people coming in very quickly, in the middle of going public, in the middle of growing 35 stores, you've got new bosses, you've got new HR, and you think, these guys, they don't know how we actually do this stuff. They haven't been through the training, but they're really nice people, and they're really smart people, and then they haven't really necessarily been told that what we do is different.
I do remember walking by one office and I looked in and it was in Bob Mears' office, and there's 8 people sitting there and they were making a decision on what warehouse sale to do, and there wasn't one internal person there. And I knew that someone wasn't going to be able to give them context of the past and be able to sort of stand for the brand and different things. So those were key lessons. And how do we have a good mix of internally developed people as well as externally experienced people, and then put them together?
Not only did Bob start to become a liability, but then the people under him that were then managing the company were becoming a liability. And either the company had to go one of 2 ways. It had to go the old corporate, talk to the street, give the street what it wants, work towards Wall Street, or it had to go this Lululemon culture way, which is like really loving and taking care of our people in order that our customers are taken care of. Like the family is more important even than the business, so to speak, with our people. And so there was going to be a revolt in the company. Either all our good people underneath these top 6 were going to leave or not.
When you're bringing people up to Vancouver, to a small company that's very culturally led, and you don't take the time to get alignment on who those people are going to be, so who is involved in that interview process, and then really taking the time to get that person integrated into the company, neither of you stand a chance to succeed.
The company went from manufacturing 80% of the goods in Canada, selling to a host of Canadian stores, to manufacturing offshore as well as delivering to 2 different countries around a much more complex distribution system. And along the way, we didn't have people with enough experience to be able to deal with some of the problems that leads to. And it's very typical in retail. You know, the biggest problem is making sure that you can get the order quantities right, to do your demand forecasting, to do your markdowns, and to the way you manage your retail assortment and your open to buy. And Lulu, when they were in this fast growth phase, it's really difficult. So if you're growing at 50% a year, and then your comps are up 20, 30%, and merchandise would literally store in 3 days if it was a hot product. So I think number one, just having experienced people was one aspect. The other is, I don't think your best people in the country, you would have made some mistakes where you're trying to order inventory and manage that for something when it's in this dynamic growth phase. One of the things that happened on the real estate side was that Lulu knew the Canadian market like the back of their hand. They could pick the best main and main location or the best mall just because they knew it. And they didn't really have a really strong real estate head. And when we moved to the United States, it was a whole different ballgame. There's more than 1,000 possible locations, and making sure, and you also weren't known to the developers, so making sure that you got the right location with a 50-yard line position was something that in the growth phase the company did not do a very good job with.
Well, I think Bob promised the market 35 stores, and he was going to deliver on them no matter whether they were good or not. So he saw, I think, that's what he's supposed to deliver, and I think because he had short-term thinking in and out of the company, all he had to do was put up 35 stores, do that promise, and the stock would get it, he'd be out and he'd be gone.
We chase the number. We listen to Wall Street, and I think that's where our inexperience as a company worked against us, and we weren't able to grow organically. So every time that we were in a market well in advance with the right people, we always had success.
If you just looked at the portfolio that had opened in the past, particularly in Canada, and you did the math, you would say my most successful stores are malls. So then that was, in the US, open malls. But there was a sequence of how Chip had actually built the market. And what happened in the US when you didn't follow the sequence and you just did the end result was we ended up with high cost real estate with no demand.
We really got a bunch of bad locations, quite frankly. Paying a lot for them for too long a lease, can't get out of them. High rent right before what year are we in, 2009, economic recession, so to speak. And so that's a real challenge for us right now.
We felt like Christine would be a great CEO. She hadn't been a standalone CEO before, and she'd spent the bulk of her career with Starbucks. And so Starbucks is a great company, but a very different company than Lululemon. And so Starbucks had a cultural piece that was important to it, and was a large global retailer, but a food service business. So it didn't have the apparel, the design element, and the markdown, the whole flow of a retailer. So, we felt like it was important for Christine to have some of that time period in the saddle, getting to know the business, before she was, we were relying on her to make all these important decisions.
The plan called for Day
We
to
have a
overlap with
target
Mears for
guest
1
who's
year,
32
but she
years
ended
old.
up taking over as CEO 6 months earlier than anticipated when Mears stepped down.
Fortunately or unfortunately, the stock went so high, short sellers came in and started pushing the stock up, and then it kind of clicked in that Bob, through his deal with Advent, could work his way out, and it really wasn't working with Bob because he'd just recently got married, and his wife didn't want to move here, and she wasn't our market, and she didn't understand, and so you could see the parting of the ways coming really quickly.
He accomplished what he set out to do with Lululemon in terms of the stock price. And, his family didn't want to move here, and I think, it was the right time. Bob had come in and done what he said he was going to do. And he had an out in his contract, and he took it.
The intent is not to have boxed-in job descriptions. It's to
Day's experience is creating systems in the early days of Starbucks, and her appreciation for Lululemon's purpose-led culture won her the respect of founder Chip Wilson.
She built a lot of retail stores. For her, building 35 stores was like she could do that in her sleep. But it was more so how to hire the people, the systems to set up, what is actually the feeling in the retail store, which is, because we're vertical retail, and it just wasn't enough Bob knew the sports industry and the apparel business. Christine knew people and motivation and structure and growth and what goes wrong at different stages, and what you need to put in place so you don't have the pitfalls.
too strong. You don't want it to look like a pool.
No.
She totally took in who we were culturally. We have a lot of that San Francisco peace, love, dove, Hare Krishna, all you groovy cat thing going on in our company, and especially from a yoga scene. And we're totally a woman's company, and I think it was really great having a woman on top. I think it really gave the rest of the woman it was totally a shift from the Bob Mears male thing to Christine female, which is really where I was pushing the company in the long run anyway. And
I've never been led by a female CEO before, and the difference is cool for us to have her as a role model. Has 3 kids. She's got the balance. She understands the challenges and the pressures, and I think she certainly stands for us, and I just think it's a dream setup.